Well, kids, we've just finished Tales of Narnia with interludes of Horton Hears a Who, Too Many Kids in the Tub, Where Love is God Is, Philemon and Baucis, and The Lion Who Roared Me, Myself, and I. Now I'm going to tell you a story that's never been told before and might never be told again. So listen carefully. You might be the only ones in the whole wide world to hear the story of Toothpick Charlie.
Toothpick, Toothpick Charlie, Toothpick, Toothpick Charlie, Toothpick!
Why do you think he was called Toothpick? Because he was as skinny as a toothpick? Good guess. And he was indeed. Some time ago, during breakfast, Charlie grabbed a third biscuit before anyone else had finished their first. "My goodness, Charlie," his mother said, "you eat more than the rest of us combined, but stay skinny as a toothpick." The sister right behind him in age laughed. "He eats and eats, but will food stick? No, Charlie's skinny as a toothpick." His brother chimed in, "Toothpick Charlie." And the two youngest, not counting the baby, joined in, repeating until it became a song.
Toothpick Charlie, Toothpick, Toothpick Charlie, Toothpick! Toothpick, Toothpick Charlie.
They knew he ate a lot, but stayed slim because while growing taller, he was working or playing all day. He worked a lot because his family lived on a small farm and did all the gardening and animal care by themselves. Since Charlie was the oldest child, his parents would call on him for help the other children could not give. And, just like you, he was always happy to help his parents. That morning after breakfast, for example, Papa said, "Time to weed the strawberries, Charlie." He answered, "Sure," and ran to the garden to pull grass away from the strawberry plants. He did not see much of a difference between work and play. In the apple tree next to the garden, a cardinal was whooping whistling. Papa started the first work, play, game by saying, "I wonder who can make the biggest pile of weeds between the cardinal's calls." Charlie had the most weeds when the cardinal started whistle whooping again. His father had the most after the next time. After a few more sets of whistle whooping, Papa said, "Okay, Charlie, you win. As a prize, you can take the weeds to the compost pile." As you gather cards up after a game and put them in their box, Charlie gathered the weeds up and threw them into the compost pile, the place where leftover hay, vegetable peels, goat manure, and other such stuff turn into food for the garden soil. When Charlie got back, they worked in silence until Papa said, "I pulled 2 weeds away from this plant. If I do the same for the next 11, how many weeds will I have pulled?" Charlie got that one right away. Then, "If you pull 2 weeds away from the first plant, 6 from the next, and 14 from the third, how many will you likely pull from the fourth plant?" That took Charlie a bit longer. He liked the puzzles that took longer. Identifying a pattern for the first time. Patterns that might apply to anything or only one thing. Weeds by strawberries or dots on butterfly wings. Or lines in poems. Today, Papa started that off with one of the simplest rhyming patterns, but one they always enjoyed playing with, especially at the end of a work session. "There once was a curious opossum who searched for a strawberry blossom, but being blind it none could find until it crawled across them." Charlie answered with, "The possum was curious but lazy, his thinking that day rather hazy. It's not the best spot, but I've crawled a lot, so I'll not try to find Daisy." Papa said, "I'm glad you're not like the opossum, Charlie. I reckon you should help the goats find a daisy tomorrow." Charlie grinned. He knew what his dad meant. It was his favorite chore. Charlie's favorite chore was shepherding the family's goats and sheep. This was the first day of the year to do it. The goats and sheep had been fenced in around the barn for the whole winter and into the spring, while the redbud bloomed, then the mountain laurel, and the maples leafed out. Yesterday, the urgent barking of Rufus and Crow, the Pyrenees shepherd dogs, alerted the family that 2 goats had escaped the fence. At supper, Papa said, "They see the oak leaves are coming out. They want to get up into those hills." So that was where Charlie was taking them. He got up earlier than he needed to, but he loved taking the goats and sheep up while the wood thrushes were still fluting, and rosy-fingered dawn prepared ribbons of mist that would hang down from the rising sun on the path ahead and through the oaks to the side. Not having been up this path since last year, Charlie, with the help of Rufus and Crow, kept the animals close. When Sparkle tried to eat some ragwort, Charlie tapped him away with his walking stick. In the shadows of the first rhododendron stand crowding the path, he had to whack Billy a couple times while the dogs pushed the others in the herd away from the rubbery green leaves, thick and long. "There's better food ahead," Charlie called out, and there was indeed in the field they came to. Charlie guided the animals into the middle and told Rufus and Crow to stay. The dogs knew he meant make the goats and sheep stay in the field. So the dogs went to opposite sides of the herd to keep any of the sheep or goats from straying too far. This wasn't too hard, since the herd was happy to munch away at the fresh grass. Charlie went back and forth throughout the field, and then along its edge, looking for plants like the rhododendron that the goats would try to eat even if it made them sick later. On the highest edge of the field was what he called the watchtower, a boulder rising above other rocks. Dang! A rattlesnake was stretched out on a flat rock beneath the boulder, enjoying the morning sun. Charlie was not surprised to see a rattler, but it was one of the longest he had seen. A good one for the preacher, he thought. He stepped back a few feet, untied the gunny sack that had been hanging from his belt, emptied it of the sandwiches and water jar, and placed it wide open on the ground. With his right hand he took his walking stick. When used as a walking stick, the fork end was up, but when used as a snake catcher, the forked end was down. The snake was enjoying the sun too much to pay Charlie any attention. Charlie slowly climbed up behind it, slowly stood up straight, slowly raised his walking stick, and quick as lightning, well, almost that quick, jabbed the stick down. The fork pinned the snake down right behind its head. It rattled and twisted and rattled, but it could not free itself from the stick. Charlie waited for the snake to calm down, then with his left hand grabbed it right behind the stick. He lifted it up as high as he could. Its tail almost reached the ground. He dropped it into the gunny sack and quickly tied the opening into a knot. Charlie brought the animals back in mid-afternoon so that he would have time to take the snake to Preacher, who lived a couple hollers away. And, well, since I use the word holler as if I'm sure of what it means, I probably should say that I'm not exactly. Some say a holler is a distance that one's yell can be heard when there's no wind or rain. So if someone sent a message by hollering from the bottom of a hill to someone on the top, who hollered it to someone on the top of another hill, who hollered to someone down the next valley, that valley would be a couple hollers away. But others say holler comes from what school books write as HOLLOW when referring to an empty or low space, and that most people pronounce hollow. And that makes sense, since what Charlie's dad writes as feller and yeller, the teacher writes as fellow and yellow. Whatever, Charlie did get to the preacher's house a couple hollers away. The preacher whistled when he saw the snake. "That's a good one, Charlie. How much do you want to take from the church folks' offering for it?" "That's up to you, preacher." Preacher sighed, took out his wallet, slowly took out a few bills, and handing them to Charlie said, "It's the Lord's money, so use it well." Charlie was tempted to say, "It's the Lord's snake, so handle it carefully." But not wanting to sound sassy, he politely said, "Thank you," and turned to go. But then he had an idea for a better deal, both ways. Once in a while, Charlie went to the preacher's church. He enjoyed hearing the preacher's stories about an old man getting bears to go after children who mocked his bald head, or of a person named Pigeon caught in a thunderstorm out at sea, thrown overboard by the sailors, swallowed by a huge fish, then puked back onto dry land. He enjoyed the last part of the service when the preacher went to a cage in back of the pulpit, slowly, gently lifted out a rattler or a copperhead, held it while it swayed its head, then passed it to one of the elders who had come up and would pass it on to others, as silently and reverently as they passed and received the bread and juice of communion on First Sunday. But what he enjoyed most was the music, the exuberant singing with the support of guitars, tambourines, drums, and piano.
I saw the light, I saw the light, no more darkness, no more night. Now I'm so happy, no sorrow in sight. Praise the Lord, I saw the light.
His family loved to sing, but the only instruments they had were their dad's harmonica and the percussions of clapping hands or drumming on the table. How great it would be, Charlie thought, to have a guitar to play while they sang, or, in quieter times, such as when he was in the hills with the goats and sheep, to pick out melodies. Charlie said, "Preacher, last time I was at your church, there were a couple of guitars in the corner, but no one played them." Preacher smiled and said, "And might can be no one will. Although we are to store up heavenly treasures rather than earthly ones, it's hard for me to part with a guitar. They might not play as well as my newer ones, but they all have good memories." "Oh," Charlie looked down, regretful like. "Why do you ask, Charlie?" "Oh, I just thought maybe rather than you giving me money for the rattler, I could bring some more snakes, and when you thought I had brought enough, you could give me one of those guitars. That way you wouldn't have to worry about misspending the Lord's money. But now I know why you keep them." "Well, Charlie," Preacher said, "the memories attached to those guitars are good. But what would be much better is the thought of someone like you playing one. I like your proposition. You bring me 2 more snakes like this one, and you can have which guitar in the corner you choose. And I'll feel less guilty about storing up treasures on earth." Singing was one thing Charlie did when he was happy. Running was another, and he ran all the way home with the good news about getting a guitar for the family.
Praise the Lord, I saw the light.
The next time Charlie took the animals up into the open fields, he spent the first part of the morning climbing over rocks looking for snakes, but found none. He went back to the stand of yellow birch on the north side, broke off a couple of the lower branches, and went with them up to the watchtower. From there he could see the whole field. Rufus was watching the sheep and goats from the north side. Crow was doing the same from the south side. All in the herd were grazing in the sun. The watchtower was still in the shade, making the scene below stand out in clarity. Charlie gazed in silence at them for a while, but, as often happened up here, he sensed a pressure pushing at his chest and head, somewhat like what would happen to his stomach when he ate a lot. He figured that just as taking in food makes the stomach expand and that it could burst if one didn't stop, the peace and beauty of the surroundings were making his heart and brain expand, and that they could burst if he didn't do something. One of his remedies was to sing, sometimes making up his own song, sometimes, as he did now, adapting one that he had heard on the radio or during a gathering of neighbors on special days. I see leaves so green, red clover too, they seem to gleam for me and you, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I see skies so blue and clouds so white. The winter's been dark, but we're growing in light. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. The colors of the field, so pretty in the sun. I say to Mother Nature, oh, how well done. I hear crows a-cawing and hawks a-shrieking. The chickadees keep chickadee-dee-deeing. I see lambs a-playing, I'll watch them grow. How it all happens, I'll never know. But I'll say to myself, what a wonderful world. Yes, I'll say to myself, what a wonderful world. He sang it a couple more times, trying different words, different images, until that inside pressure had gone down. Then he just sat for a while, ever watching the animals and all around them, ever listening to the birds, and often feeling a soft breeze. Even on the warmest days, breezes would whisper through the treetops and around him. Sometimes they seemed to go through him as well, making him feel calm as a rock, light as a leaf, thin and stretched out like a spider web, joining him with the breeze, the trees, the animals, the sun. Sometimes he felt like a part of him floated on the breeze, and that he could look down from over the trees and see not just the field where his body sat, but the woods from the mountaintop down to his family's farm and the neighbors' farms, and far beyond to the blue patches of lake and to the flatlands. Then he'd see, hear, and feel nothing that he could describe, except that he seemed to become part of the light. Drink your tea, drink your tea. Today, a rufous-sided towhee called him back to within his body. Drink your tea, Charlie said to the bird. Today no tea, my dear towhee, but I will have some water with ye. After a few sips from his water jar, Charlie took out his jackknife, picked up the birch stick, and began to slice away at it. With bigger branches, Charlie would often whittle little figures for his siblings to play with. A dog or a doll, a bear or a bird. But today he was just going to make toothpicks, there having been none on the table for a while. By the time for taking the animals back down, he had a few months' worth of toothpicks. He didn't show them to anyone until after supper. They'd only had potato soup and biscuits, but Charlie knew his dad would like a toothpick now just as much as he would after feasting on goat meat. And Charlie honored him by giving him one that was a foot long. While the kids were laughing at his presentation, Monty sang out,
Toothpick!
and the other siblings joined in.
Toothpick, toothpick, Charlie. Toothpick, toothpick, Charlie. Toothpick, toothpick, Charlie.
Getting louder and louder
Toothpick,
until Mama said with a
toothpick,
smile,
Charlie.
Okay,
Toothpick,
okay,
toothpick,
I think that's enough.
Charlie.
And I think that has been enough story for one night. Good night. What? You're still awake? Sure? Okay, just a little bit more. But I'm going to show you less pictures now so you can close your eyes, watch Charlie in your imagination, and maybe fall asleep before the story is over. And that'll be quite all right, because then we can be sure of having a story tomorrow night. Okay? So Now I'm going to tell you why Charlie's friends called him Toothpick Charlie. Oh, you say I already did tell you that? No, if I remember correctly, I told you about 2 times his siblings called him that.
Toothpick.
But those 2 times were about it. Then they went back to calling him Charlie. Until, well, I need to give a bit of background information first. The late spring that Charlie gave Preacher the first snake came and went, and so did the summer, during which Charlie found 2 other snakes and got his guitar. Preacher was happy to give Charlie lessons throughout the year because that boy practiced. Well, that's what the preacher called it. But just as Charlie didn't see much of a difference between work and play, he didn't see much of a difference between practicing and playing. He enjoyed practicing the new chords Preacher showed him. He enjoyed playing them, playing with them. First getting a new one down, then going from others to that one in the same order, then changing the order, then playing just part of one chord and slightly changing how he held his fingers for another. He could do so over and over again when he was up in the watchtower. The sheep and goats would occasionally give him a curious look, but didn't seem to mind the repetitions. For their patience, Charlie would reward them with a song or two. If he saw them wandering too close to the rocks or to the trees, he'd strum his guitar and sing out something like, "There are dark and dangerous woods in life, but there are bright and sunny pastures too. You can meet a bear with each claw like a knife, so better keep the sunny side in view. Keep on the sunny side, always on the sunny side. Keep on the sunny side alive. It will help you every day. It will brighten up the way if you keep on the sunny side of life. Oh, lambs, as we hike this hill today, leaving home comforts so dear. You were tired and tempted to stray, but now the sun is shining bright and clear. Keep on the sunny side, always on the sunny side. Keep on the sunny side alive. It will help you every day. It will brighten up the way if you keep on the sunny side of life. There are poisonous plants in the woods, and lion or bear could give you a scare. But here you have grass and other goods. I want to keep you all in my care. So keep on the sunny side, always on the sunny side. Keep on the sunny side alive. It will help you every day. It will brighten up the way if you keep on the sunny side of life. Another development over the school year was that Charlie got to watch the older kids in his school play baseball. Although it meant getting home well after dark, running and walking the whole way, he was allowed to watch their Friday games with other schools. He especially enjoyed watching the pitcher. It was the part of the game he could imagine himself doing. Throwing was both work and play for him. During the late spring and summer, he would heave hay bales onto the trailer and then in the loft. In the fall and early spring, when getting ground ready for new garden space, he would pick rocks out of the soil where corn or beans would be planted and throw the rocks into the woods, often aiming for a certain tree or a boulder in among them. Sometimes, while weeding or harvesting the garden and his sister was bent down at work on the other side, he would toss a clod of dirt in an arc so that it would splat down on her back. She'd jump up and, if in a good mood, eventually laugh. Otherwise, she'd threaten to leave all the work to him, sure that Papa would take her side. Occasionally, when he took the goats and sheep up to the field, he would take a load of stones in his gunny sack along with his lunch. There were plenty of slabs of rocks and boulders up in the field, but the only stones were ones left from his last time there. If he saw a goat wandering too far from the rest of the herd, he'd throw a rock ahead of it, and it would jump back towards the others. But when the animals were well placed and calm, he used one of his stones like chalk to scratch away at the lower part of the watchtower and make a small square. From about 20 steps away, he would throw rocks at the box, sometimes imitating the motions of the pitchers in the baseball game before throwing the ball. At first, he tried to get the stones to hit within the box, but that became too easy, so he would aim for certain parts of the box: the left upper corner, the right lower corner, in the center. Then how many times in a row he could hit the same corner. Sometimes he'd throw from further out, or with bigger stones. One night, when they were all in bed, Rufus and Crow started barking louder and louder. "Must be a fox," Papa said, got the gun, and started for the door. But Charlie said, "Let me get him." Papa looked at him for a bit, then started to give Charlie the gun. "Not with the gun," Charlie said. Went outside with his dad, and in the moonlight quickly found one of his throwing rocks, almost the size of his fist. They could tell from the barking that the dogs were staying in place, which most probably meant that the fox was in between them, making its mind up what to do, or not thinking at all. The idea of a pleasant chicken dinner replaced by the realization of being sandwiched in by two creatures bigger and louder than itself. The fox's attention was on the dogs, so Pup and Charlie could move towards it quickly. "There it is," Papa whispered, pointing. Charlie curled the rock. They heard the thump and saw the fox drop down, not to move again. So, now, there's your background information, your context, your setting. Do you remember what I said the story is about? Ah, right. How Charlie came to be called Toothpick Charlie by acquaintances other than family. It was summer again, and Charlie was back up on the watchtower. The animals had been in the middle of the field during the sunny morning, but shifted over to the southern part, closer to the trees, as the breeze picked up in the afternoon and the sky got cloudier. Charlie saw that the dogs were well placed in keeping their eyes on animals. He called out, "We'll head back in a half hour or so we don't get caught in the storm that's a-comin'." Then he returned to work on a new song about what had happened the night before. That I might tell you about some other time. But now, see Rufus trying to get Billy Goat away from the rhododendron stand, and see Billy trying to stay where he is. Billy's tired of being bullied. He'll eat what he wants to. And see Cheryl, short for Cheryl Holla, trying to get milk from its nanny. See Nanny give a little kick, meaning, "You've had enough. Let me chew these maple twigs in peace." See Cheryl back off, and, maybe feeling like a child whose mother has just yelled at her and acting like a child whose father's attention is elsewhere, into the woods. You can see it, but not Rufus. His eyes are still on Billy. And not Nanny. She's not looking at anything. She's just nibbling away at those maple twigs, the sweetest things she's eaten in a long time. And not Charlie. His eyes are on his fingers, trying to pick out a new melody while going from G to A7 to D minor chords. "Ah, freedom," thinks Cheryl. She makes her way around a fallen log and sees a stand of trillium. "Ah, this is better than Nanny's milk, and I can have them all to myself." And she does for a minute. Then, "Ow, my neck!" Now Cheryl joins those who are not. She's not seeing anything. And for a second, this is not scary. It just is. But then she feels pain, and she then sees brown leaves on the ground moving farther away from her. She has a memory of Charlie carrying her in his arms, away from leaves, of being comforted, feeling warm, safe. But this pain, this closeness to the leaves is not like that. She suddenly twisted and felt her neck had been freed and saw she was up away from the leaves. She bleated as loud as she could, "Nanny, Nanny." Her mother heard but stood still, looking perplexed. Crow heard this over the quarrel between Billy and Rufus, leapt to his feet and ran barking towards where he had heard the call for help, although it had stopped by the time he got to the woods. Charlie heard Crow. Charlie grabbed 3 throwing rocks, jumped down from the watchtower, and sprinted after her. Before he saw her, Charlie knew by her barking that Crow was now standing still. Charlie, thrashing through bushes, pushing branches away and stumbling over a log buried in the leaves, came up to Crow and looked to where her head was pointed. At first, there seemed to be nothing but the forest floor, brown with old leaves and pine needles, with patches of green stems and white and pink trillium flowers. But there was a lump of gold that moved slightly, and a patch of white too big to be a flower. Charlie moved a step closer, and the lump of golden brown changed shape. A mountain lion. The patch of white moved slightly. Cheryl was still alive. "Okay, Mr. Lion," Charlie said softly. "You let my kid go, and I'll let you go." The lion seemed to think about it for a moment, but then backed away, Cheryl's neck still in its jaw. "Warning you, let my kiddo go." Cheryl squirmed, but the lion held it firm and continued to back away. "Okay, you asked for it." Charlie took one of his rocks. Not wanting to risk hitting Cheryl, he threw the rock in an arc so that it would hit the lion in the back, somewhat like he would throw a cloud of dirt at his sister in the garden, rather than like when he threw the rock at the fox near the chicken coop. Somewhat like his sister did, the lion jumped up when it felt the rock, and it let the kid go. Cheryl started on wobbly legs to come toward Charlie and Crow, but then fell, hurt and exhausted. The lion looked at Cheryl, then looked at Crow, then at Charlie. It advanced toward Cheryl. "No more!" He raised his arm, rock in hand. The lion was now snarling at Charlie and creeping closer to Cheryl. Like an arrow from a bow, the rock left Charlie's hand and struck the lion between its eyes. It was motionless for a moment, then slumped down. Charlie picked up a stick and with another rock in hand walked up to the lion. Charlie touched its eye with the stick, as his dad had taught him to do when hunting deer. If the eye of a deer that had been shot did not blink and no muscle twitched, you could be sure it was dead before what needed to be done to use its meat. The lion's eye did not blink, and no muscle twitched. Charlie picked up Cheryl and carried it in one arm so that he could reach down and give Crow a big hug. Then he went back to the lion and stood in silence for looking at it. What was going through Charlie's mind? How did he feel? What do you think? Charlie gently laid down Cheryl, picked the lion up and put it around his shoulders, picked Cheryl back up again in his arms, and headed home. If any one of his family ever killed an animal, they used as much of it as they could. Charlie wasn't sure what his dad would do with it, but Charlie would ask for one thing. When Monty saw Charlie nearing the house, "What you got there, Charlie? Mama, Papa, come see what Charlie's got." Everyone came out and listened to Charlie's story. Papa said, "Well, you got a mighty fine foxtail by protecting the chickens. What are you going to do with this beautiful creature?" Charlie held it out to him and said, "It's for you to decide." Papa hesitated, then smiled and said, "You're lying." "I ain't lying." "No," Papa replied, "you ain't lying, but it's you're lying." Charlie put it on the ground in front of his father and said, "Okay, I'm not lying, but it's now a lion at your feet." While the siblings were still laughing and playing with such words, Charlie said, "Papa, I think it'd make a nice rug for you and Mama, or maybe it could be hung on a wall, but I do ask for one thing." "What's that?" Papa asked. "I would like to have the fangs. I think I could use them as picks for my guitar." "Ah, Charlie, you mean you want to have a toothpick?" And off the children went again. A toothpick! A toothpick! A toothpick for Toothpick Charlie! Charlie found that the lion's fangs did indeed make good picks. As a pick to play with folk at preacher's church and then for school programs. And though he himself never told it, the story of how he got his special picks spread, and with the story, the nickname. And that's how the nickname
Toothpick!
came to stick with
Toothpick, Toothpick Charlie, Toothpick, Toothpick Charlie, Toothpick!
good night.
Toothpick, Toothpick Charlie, Toothpick, Toothpick Charlie, Toothpick!
I saw the light. No more darkness, no more night. Now I'm so happy, no sorrow inside. Praise the Lord, I saw